Okay, by now you should have answered the discussion on the previous page. We are just going to fill in the blank with the less than or greater than symbol. 1 and 2/10 is greater than 1 and 1/10. It has 1/10 more than this one. Fill in the blank using less than or greater than. Okay, 1/3 is less than 1/2. Remember with thirds, we have thirds and we have half. If I have 1/3 and 1/2, I've shaded a larger piece of the circle here than I did here. This is smaller than that piece. Okay, what is a rational number? That was our word of the day. It's an integer, any integer, decimal, or fraction. And remember, an integer are positive and negative whole numbers. So basically any whole number that's positive or negative, and any decimal or fraction. So we have whole numbers here, here, negative, so positive and negative numbers. And then rational numbers includes all of it, including positive and negative fractions and decimals. So basically rational numbers are almost all kinds of numbers. We're including fractions and decimals now, and they can be positive or negative. Okay, when we're comparing rational numbers, so specifically when we're comparing decimals, you're going to want to line your decimals up, put placeholders, which are zeros, and any empty spaces if you need them, and then compare those place values to determine the larger decimal. So for example, 1 and 5/10 and 2 and 38/100, we would line those up as so, put in any placeholder, and then we're going to compare starting on the left. So 1 and 2, are these different? Can we say one is bigger than the other one? Yes. The 2 is larger than the 1, so automatically in this first step, I can say, okay, I know that 2 and 38/100 is going to be larger than 1 and 5/10 because it has a whole number that is larger. It is the larger whole number. Now, if we're looking at this one, I don't even have to do any of this over here because this is a negative and this is a positive, and we learned last week that positives are always bigger than negatives. So automatically I can see that 1 and 5/100 is larger than negative 1 and 2/10 because it's positive. All positives are bigger than negatives. Now, when we get to something like this, these are two negatives. So we have negative 3 and 7/10 and negative 3 and 75/100. Use that placeholder. We actually don't need that line. I'm used to adding them. So we're just comparing. Okay, do these have different or the same whole numbers? They're the same. Okay, so now I need to move on to the next place value. Okay, here in our tenths, are they the same or different? They are the same, so I need to move on to my next place value. 0 and 5. So these are different. That means this number here is further, so if I looked at a number line, remember negatives, the larger the actual number is, the smaller it is on the number line because it's further away. So if I had 0 here and I was going to 3 and 7/10, negative 3 and 7/10, that would be here. And then negative 3 and 75/100 is bigger, so it's a little bit further down. It's a little bit further away. That means it's further away. So it's smaller. This is on the right side, so this one is larger. Okay. When comparing fractions, positives, remember positives are always bigger than negatives, so if you're ever comparing one positive and one negative, the positive number is always going to be the bigger one. We learned this a while ago. We can cross multiply. So when we have something like 7/3 and 5/6, and we want to know which one is the larger fraction, so if they're both positive fractions, the larger product is a bigger fraction. So these are both positive. Okay, when we cross multiply, we multiply 6 times 7, that's 42. And we multiply 3 times 5, and that's 15. So since they're both positive, the larger product is the bigger fraction. So which one of these numbers, which one of these products is the biggest? 42 is the biggest. So we know that 7/3 is the larger fraction. You could have also noticed that 7/3 is a fraction greater than 1, and 5/6 is not greater than 1. It hasn't even gotten to a whole amount yet. So you could have compared it that way as well. Over here, when we're looking at two negatives, okay, same thing. We can do 3/4 and 2/5. These are negatives. Now we still multiply, so 3 times 5 is 15. We're multiplying upwards. 4 times 2 is 8. This is a negative, that's a negative. So we are going to look and see, okay, the smaller product is the bigger fraction. So we're looking for which one's smaller. And even if you look and you're comparing -15 and -8, the larger one is -8 because that's closer to 0 and closer on the positive side. -15 is further away. So this one is actually the larger fraction. The last one here. Again, remember this number 1. You don't want to do a lot more work than you have to. Positives are always bigger than negatives. So we have -1/3 and 2/3. Positives are always bigger. I don't have to do any work for that one. Okay, 2/3 is the greater fraction. Remember, it opens up to the larger number. Okay, last one. What if I have to compare a fraction and a decimal? So you're going to want to convert the fraction to a decimal and then compare by looking at place value, unless it's one negative and one positive. So for example, this one, here's a negative and here's a positive. You don't have to do any work at all. Positive is always bigger than the negative. But now when we're looking here, -1 2/10 and -1/2, I want to make this into a decimal. 1/2 as a decimal. If I had half of a dollar is 50 cents. So that is 0.50, and over here is -1.2. I'm going to stack those to compare. Okay, and they're both negatives. So when I'm looking at this is a whole number, and this one is not. This second number does not have a whole number. So that means -1.2 is further down the number line. It's further that way on the number line. So that means it is smaller. So 1/2 is closer to 0. It's closer to the positive numbers. So that's the larger one. And then when you're looking here, we just did stuff like this, 1/5 and 1/8. Okay, we cross multiply. 8 times 1 gets us 8. 5 times 1 gets us 5. The one with the larger product, since these are positives, is the larger number. At this point in time, please pause the video or rewind the video. Go back to anything that you need to write down, or if you have questions that you want to come in during Zoom and ask. But you need to compare these, okay? Remember, the larger the negative number looks like, that's the actually smaller it is, okay? So please pause the video and make sure you have all of this down, and write down any questions you want to ask. Okay, now that we have compared fractions and decimals, positive and negative, you are going to do this Jeopardy game, comparing integers. This is just like we did last week, comparing decimals and comparing rational numbers, all greater than and less than. You will see stuff like this on your quiz, so make sure you are practicing it before you do the quiz.